How's it going, everyone? This is Chris Laparty. I'm back with my great friend Dan Cortine, and welcome to A Father's Love Healing Through Heartache. We're excited. We have a guest with us. His name is Kerry, and we're super excited to hear his story of grief and how he's been proceeding and dealing with his loss. But before that, Dan, how you doing? You hanging in there this week?
I'm doing okay, same as always, Chris. It's good to see you, buddy. And Carrie, it's awesome to see you and have you here, my friend.
So with that, we're gonna pass it over to Kerry, and Kerry, wish that we didn't have to meet this way, but we're here as a team, and we would love to hear your story, however you'd like to tell it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, I wish I had never had to meet you guys as well. As I've said to many folks, this is the club you never want to be a member of, and it's been a tough one for sure. But I wanted to tell you guys how much I appreciate what you guys are doing. I was a little resistant at first when I first came across your podcast because I thought, well, I just can't handle that right now. But then I got involved and started listening to it and have really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm just really appreciative of what you guys are trying to do for others. And, just being able to talk to someone sometimes just really makes all the difference in the world. So again, thank you. I'll start my story with talking about my beautiful daughter, Caroline. Um, she was 23 years old. Um, I'll start the story on the day of her passing. It was President's Day, February the 17th of 2020. So about 16 months ago, that's how long this journey's been going on for us. It was a holiday, President's Day, so I was actually off work that day. She had come home. She was living in Birmingham, which is about an hour from where we live. So um, we didn't get to see her every day, but we talked every day or texted every day. She had come home midday that day to spend some time with us, and she had to get a few things from home. And we just had an absolutely great day that afternoon, spending time together, talking, and you know, getting ready for her plans. Um, she had just graduated from college in December of 19, so approximately 6, 7 weeks before the accident, she had just graduated, and she was, in the process of looking at jobs and had a couple of job offers, and she was asking me, opinions, that kind of thing. But we just had a great time sharing that afternoon, just talking and sharing and, helping her get the paperwork together she needed. And when she got ready to leave that day, as always, it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She was getting ready to leave to go visit some friends. And as always, I would walk her out to her car, and we would chit chat as we walked out. I would always give her some money, and she would get to the car, and and we would say our goodbyes. And I guess while this makes me very emotional to say, I also take comfort in the very last words I ever spoke to my daughter was, "I love you, baby." And her words back to me were, "I love you, Dad." And she was gone. She backed out of the driveway and she left. So while that hurts, and I know that's weird, that hurts to know, but it's also comforting to know that we parted on good terms. Um, she knew I loved her, and she knew her mom loved her. She was loved, but yeah, I said, "I love you, baby," and she said, "I love you, Dad," and she was gone to visit her friends. So fast forward through the evening. I'm a We're members of a pretty large regional church, and we have multiple campuses for our church, and we lead. I was co-leading at the time a men's group with another friend of mine, and it's a group it was helping men with issues that they were dealing with at the time. So that Monday night was our group meeting, and I was at my friend's house. We had our group of men. We had about 25 men there, and we the group was going fine. Everyone was sharing. Things were great. And it ran a little long that night. So I was leaving his house about 9 o'clock. And as I pull out of his neighborhood, which is just a few miles from my house, my son calls. I have a son who's 2.5 years older than my daughter. And, I answered the phone, "Hey, bud." And he said, "Dad, where are you?" And I just knew by his tone something was wrong. I just knew there was a problem. I said, "What's the matter, son?" He said, "I just need you to come home." And I said, "Well, I'm on my way." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Just come home." And so we hung up the phone. Of course, I'm speeding, trying to get home. And a little funny in that story, he was 25 at the time. As a teenager, he had had a couple of speeding issues with the local police. And they had actually brought him home one time. So, my first thought was, he's been speeding, he's gotten caught, they're after him, whatever. But it's still, I could just tell by the tone of his voice, something was wrong. So I'm speeding home myself. I turn in our neighborhood, and as I come around the corner to our house, there's 2 state trooper cars sitting in front of my house. And again, my first thought was, "Oh my gosh, what did he do?" What did you do? So I pull into the garage, and I come in the house, and there sits my wife in the chair, and my son is standing there, and these 2 state troopers are standing there, and they're very young. You can tell they're in their 20s, and their eyes were as big as saucers, and I walked in the room, and I could tell my wife's crying, and I just said, "What's the matter? What's wrong?" And they proceed to tell me that she had been in an accident. She was headed home to Birmingham. Actually, let me back up just a moment. She had texted me at 5:30 and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm headed home." That was our thing. She always let me know where she was going. She always let me know, because I was insistent that she did. She had texted me about 5:30 that she was headed home. I said, "Okay, great." I said, "Just text me when you get home." And again, because I was in the men's group meeting, I actually kind of forgot about it because I didn't realize I had not gotten a text from her at that point. I just was busy and had forgotten. So she was about halfway home to Birmingham, and there was an accident already on the interstate. And as she comes around the curve, there's an 18-wheeler that stopped. Traffic is backed up and stopped. And she comes around the curve, and she's probably speeding a little herself. There's another car in between them, but she doesn't see them. She hits the car and pushes that car into the 18-wheeler. The coroner tells me that she died on impact, which honestly I'm grateful for. There was no suffering, because that thought has haunted me many times. So I would hate to know she was there alone suffering. That just really, really haunts me to think about. But he assured me, because of the evidence of the injuries, that she died pretty much on impact. The driver of the 18-wheeler was a female, and actually is a company that I'm associated with through my business that the truck belongs to. I didn't know that at the time, but the lady driver got out of her vehicle when she realized she had been hit, and she came back to check on the 2 vehicles. She saw the vehicle under her, she saw the people in that vehicle, and she saw my daughter's car and realized it was a young girl by herself. So she goes to her car, and she stays there and prays for her until the paramedics or ambulance arrive. So also, it's comforting to know that she wasn't really alone. There was someone there with her, even though she was deceased. She wasn't physically alone at that moment. Um, that's a little comfort for me to know that the lady was there. Um, so that's the story they tell me when I get home, and um, you know, within 30 minutes of that happening, or within an hour, our house was full of people. The word didn't get out until we were told. My wife called her brother and told him, and both of our moms, and told them, and so the word got out quickly from there. And again, within an hour, our home was just full of people, supporters. And it really was a blur. Um, I remember bits and pieces of that evening. I mean, the people were here until probably 2 in the morning. The first person that arrived was our pastor of our local campus. He actually was a neighbor. He's no longer with our church, but he was a neighbor, and he was the first one to arrive. And that was great for him to be here. Then again, moments later, the house was full. It was just, again, that evening was just a blur to me. I mean, there were people coming out, trying to tell the story over and over to people, trying to wrap my brain around the fact that it was actually real. I thought many times, even during the night when they were here, that, I mean, why is this nightmare happening? This is not real. This is not real. She's going to text me in a minute, tell me she's home. But that didn't happen. So she and I were extremely close. She was always more of a tomboy than a girly girl. She had an older brother. He's 2.5 years older, and she had the mindset that anything he could do, she could do it, and even better. And typically she did. I wouldn't tell him that, but that's the truth. She was very much a tomboy in athletic sports, loved to play all sports, loved music. She was an accomplished musician, a self-trained musician. She played by ear. We gave her piano lessons when she was a kid, and within 2 weeks, her piano teacher stopped my wife and she said, "I can't teach this child anything. She knows it already." She said, "She plays by ear. She plays beautifully." She said, "I'm wasting my time and your money by trying to teach her something." So we stopped the lessons there, and she wanted to learn to play guitar, and she taught herself. She taught herself to play, and she was just an amazing musician. All of her friends were just amazed that she was self-taught, that she could play so well. And the friends that she left here to go visit that evening were some fellow musician friends. It's a husband and wife couple, and they were quite a bit older than her. The man was a former guitarist. He was a backup guitarist for a couple of really major bands that you would know the names if I said them. I mean, really major stars. He had played in several backup bands for those folks, and his business was he builds guitars. And Caroline was so good at playing and so good at working on the guitars. He basically paid her to work on guitars and fix guitars. People would bring guitars to his house, and they would say, "This is what's wrong with this guitar." And he would go, "Well, Caroline won't be here until Tuesday. You'll have to wait till she gets here to fix it." So, I'm glad that she spent her last evening doing something that she truly loved doing. She was building a guitar for my nephew, and so of course that remains undone at this point in time. I'm going to stop just a minute and breathe for a moment, and you guys, if you have a question, please feel free.
All right. Well, first of all, Kerry, thank you so much for being here and for sharing. For those of people who are listening who haven't shared their story, we totally understand it, but it's hard to get on here and talk about losing our children. So thank you. Um, we love hearing about truly what sounds like an amazing young lady. And as Chris I think said at the beginning, we're sorry that you're here, um, but she sounds amazing. I'm I'm curious about two things if you can dig a little deeper on it. You said that the last words were "I love you, baby," and she responded, "I love you, Dad." And Chris and I have discussed with various people and each other about is it more comforting to know that you're about to lose somebody or the spur of the moment? Chris had a few days in the hospital with Mason. Jameson was all of a sudden went to bed totally healthy and he was gone the next morning. So we've got both sides of that spectrum here. You were obviously very sudden. I didn't say goodbye to Jameson, and that haunts me. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that statement. Does that help you or not?
Yeah, as I said, I think in some ways it's both. It haunts me, as I said, because just knowing that was the very last time I will ever speak to her, I will ever hear her voice, that the words were, "I love you, Dad." Um, but it's comforting in the fact that I know we ended on great terms.
Yeah.
You know, there was no disagreement. And she was a very spirited young lady as well, so there could be a few tense moments, especially with her and her mom. They could be pretty tense with one another quite at times. But she she was just such a loving, giving person. Again, it haunts me, I guess, just in the fact of knowing that that was it. That was the end. Um, and that hurts. But again, on the other hand, I do take extreme comfort in knowing that that was our final words to one another. It wasn't, we didn't end in an argument. We didn't end on cross terms. You know, there was no agenda that evening. It was strictly just, "I love you."
Great.
And I guess more than anything, I'm grateful for that.
I think that's a great example to everybody listening again of just everything when you're grieving has a pro and a con with it. I mean, you can have the same moment that can be as happy as possible for the memory, but just torturing us because we realize it's the final thing or whatever it happens to be, and it's something that we live with the rest of our life. I'm glad to hear. It warms my heart to hear that you had that moment, and it certainly is. Warms my heart to hear that you know that Caroline knew that mom and dad loved her, and I think that's crucial for everybody listening to hear that clearly again. That there's a Bible verse about don't go to bed angry, don't let the sun go down on your anger. We've got to take advantage of our moments, people, and because you never know. But I'm glad you had that moment, and I totally understand the flip side. So, Chris.
Yeah, Caroline sounds amazing. Carrie sounds like a perfect daughter, and I'm so sorry you're going through this. Some of the things I wrote down that I think I'd like to talk to you about. Um, you said at one point everything really felt like a blur, like you just it's kind of hazy as you try to remember it now after you first found out. That feeling of that it's not real. She's gonna call. I remember those feelings too. Like this can't be happening. There's no way this is real. And then the other thing I'm wondering if you could talk about, um, telling the story over and over as people kept coming to your house, of what you knew at the moment of what had happened, and if that was really difficult for you, or I personally didn't like that, how I had to keep talking about it for a while. But people deserve to, in my opinion, people deserve to know what happened to my son Mason. But at the same sense, I didn't want to talk about it because it just made it more real. So if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, the blur, like how fuzzy it was, or if it's just fuzzy now as time goes on, and then having to tell that story over and over again.
Yeah, as I said, that the evening was somewhat of a blur. I think maybe if I moved from full consciousness to maybe half consciousness throughout the evening, there was again times where I kept thinking, this is not real. You people leave. This is not real. Go home. She's gonna call me in a minute, or she's gonna text me and tell me, hey, Dad, I'm home. I'm sorry, I'm late, or whatever. I mean, she's gonna let me know. And yeah, it was just having to tell the story over and over that evening. I will say for that evening, I was a true basket case. I was out of my head in many moments, out of body feeling experience. My wife handled it that evening much, much better than I did. She was a little more solid. She held herself together a little better than I did. We have since, in the 16 months since that time, we have flip-flopped positions many times. There's times I'm strong, there's times she's weak, and vice versa. There's times we're weak together. There's times we're strong together. I think she has had a harder time dealing with it in year 2 than I have. And while year 2 has not been pleasant by any means, I've handled it a little better than she did. I think maybe it was shock. Maybe it took her longer to overcome the shock, and now the reality is just this past Thursday, June the 10th, was Caroline's birthday. She would have been 25. And as was our family tradition, we always have family dinner that evening with my wife's extended family. She has one brother and his wife and 3 children. And then my mom and stepfather and her mom always come for dinner. And we, vice versa, we go to their house. That's just been our family tradition for the kids' whole life. The week leading up to Caroline's birthday, my wife just had a really tough week. She, just the reality of what was coming was just so hard for her. And so the day of her birthday, Thursday, it was a tough day. I ended up, I worked half a day at my office, and then I came home and worked at home for the rest of the afternoon. But I don't know that I really accomplished much because I wasn't focused. But so when the family came, it was okay, but it was difficult for us, very difficult. And I'll say this: I mean, I love my family. I have a great family, but even family doesn't truly understand, and there's awkwardness and a little tension, even with family. You have that with other people for sure, but even family, there's a little awkwardness and tension, and thank God they don't understand. There's an element of that. I don't want them to ever understand. I don't wish this on anyone, but so that's just a side note, I guess. It's just, it's hard, even with family. There's times that it's hard. When you want to, you just want to scream at the top of your lungs, or you just want to punch the wall, or whatever you want to do, but other people don't understand why you're feeling that way.
You're saying things that Chris and I could totally relate to, and we've discussed many of them. And yeah, it's always that juggling act. You just said something that we haven't talked about. So if you're comfortable with it, can we know following all the grief boards, you see constantly posts about people's marriages falling apart, and I don't know the exact number, but the statistically marriages are, I don't know, 70, 80%, 60% likely to fail after the loss of a child. And people are very clear, at least in my network, people were very clear to point that out immediately after Jameson's death. So you have to make an extra effort to make your marriage work. It sounds like from what you just said, your marriage is strong and pretty healthy. You gave a few examples of how you and your wife support each other at different times. Can you, for all the grieving parents out there whose marriages may be struggling, can you talk more about that? Uh, Specifically, how your wife and you have made it through this first, um, what was it, 16 months, and just kept your marriage solid?
Yeah, we actually have some friends who lost a son. Um, I think it's approximately 10, 11 years ago now. Um, their marriage sadly ended in divorce. They were a statistic, and they were married probably 5 years beyond his death, but it just didn't work for them. They for whatever reason, they were at such different places in their lives, or whatever happened, with grief. I mean, grief impacts you so hard. The very night, that Monday night, when finally, most everyone's gone. A few people spent the night here. I don't even recall at the moment who. Um, but my wife, and it was, again, like I said, maybe 2 in the morning. We're going to our bedroom, and my wife takes me by the hands, and she looks at me and she says, "Listen." And again, pulling on our experience with friends, she said, "I don't want this to tear us apart." She said, "I don't want this to be the end of us." And I agreed. I said, "I don't either. I don't want that. We have a son who needs us." But she just, again, drawing on the experience we had with friends that weren't able to make it happen, she just said, "I don't want this to be the end of us. I want us to survive this stronger than we began." And I agreed. Um, and I think that has been in both of our minds the whole time, and so we've truly tried to support one another. You know, there's times, again, when, like I said, when we're both down at the same time, we're both up at the same time. Then there's times we're opposite, and so we can support each other. I mean, even in the both down times, we've made it a conscious effort not to say unkind things to one another, which, that happens sometimes. You're reacting out of emotion, and you might say something unkind to your spouse. But we have both, I guess, been so conscious of that fact that we know that this is a moment for support, not conflict.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's critical for everybody who's married to hear, grieving or not, that it's not easy just in normal life, but it takes that conscious effort. And Erica and I had the exact same discussion within the first hour or two that we know statistically this is hard. It's not an option for us. And so thank you for sharing.
And then I had the same conversation too, and I won't say that it's been easy, because there are a lot of stresses that are put, like you said, Dan. There's already so many extra stresses in this world put on a marriage. To add this into the mix, and the difficulties that go with it, and the stresses, you really have to have a solid foundation. And it sounds like luckily all three of us do. and all still going really well. So, um, Kerry, I had a question for you. When we were talking a little bit before we even started the podcast, you said that you want to be able to help others as well. What do you have a goal in mind or anything like? Dan and I, we wanted to start this podcast. Dan has his amazing organization, Jameson's Joy. I'm trying to set up my organization, Miles for Mason. I was just curious. We didn't discuss this at all, and I'm sorry if I'm just throwing it out there. I was curious. I know you said you wanted to help others dealing with the same kind of grief. Were you working on anything that you wanted to throw out there?
Yeah, I'll back up and say this, that in that same conversation that night with my wife and I, when she took me by the hands and she said, I don't want this to be the end of us. I don't want this to tear us apart. We both actually said to one another at that moment, we were 4 hours, 5 hours into the loss of our daughter. We both said at that moment, we want to be a help to others through our grief, through this tragic event that we have suffered, that we want to help others. Um, we're 16 months into this thing. We're probably not truly ready to help others through work, discussion. But one thing we have done, we started a foundation as well. And last year and this year, we've awarded 2 scholarships. My daughter and son attended a private Christian high school their entire academic career, kindergarten through 12th grade. They were in a private Christian school. And my wife is a retired educator. She actually taught in that school where the kids were. We decided to award an annual scholarship in Caroline's name to a graduating senior from the Christian high school. So we have that in works already, or in process, or in full work already. It's happened for 2 years. Again, she passed in February of 20, and we awarded our first scholarship in May of 20. I have to say my work family had a lot to do with that. Again, we knew we wanted that to happen, but they really took the ball and ran with that and helped me get things set up and donated money. For the first scholarship to be given, there was so much giving from my employees, my co-employees, my work friends, my work family. It's just amazing what they've done, and to support us. And again, I mean, there's awkward times with those folks as well. That's just the way it is for us. There's awkward times, but I couldn't have asked for a more supportive group of folks to be around at that time. And let me, I had a story to tell you guys about, again, wanting to help someone. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, I was co-leading a group for men with a friend who, from my church, I had met him in a group for men just 1 year prior to this happening. I didn't know him. We live in a relatively small town. I know most everyone, but I didn't know this man or his wife. We met them at church, and he and I were in the same group. And he started telling a story one night about his son who passed away from in an automobile accident. And that had happened at that point. It had been 4 years when it happened. And fast forward, as he's telling this story, I realize I know his story because I knew his son was married. I knew his son's wife's family. So I remembered when the accident had happened for him. So, again, at that point, I had no real frame of reference. I mean, I obviously felt great sadness for him and his story, and great sympathy for him from losing a child. And again, I probably remember thinking in my mind at that point, oh my gosh, how do these people survive? How do they live with this kind of grief? So again, 1 year later, I'm co-leading a men's group with this friend, and we had shared throughout the year he had shared with me several things about his son's passing in the accident, um, and again, I was coming home from our group meeting the night that this happened, and when after the state troopers told me the story and I was in a moment of falling apart, the only person I was interested in calling, even before I was interested in calling a family member, I wanted to call this friend. And I called him, and I mean, I was, you know, wailing on the phone, bawling. Um, and I just said, Caroline, it's Caroline. And he said, I'm on my way. And he and his wife showed up. And I guess in that story, I just think how God put someone in my path a year before this happened, and I had no idea why this person was put in my path because I had no particular affinity for him as a friend. I mean, yes, we were friends, but it wasn't like we had this great connection. But I just think, wow, God put him in my path for a reason. And this last 16 months, he and his wife have been a rock for us. And we've spent a lot of time together and a lot of prayer time. And so, I truly believe there's a higher power out there working on our behalf.
Yeah, I think I've had that as well. Same exact thing. Coworker lost his son, probably 5 years. No, it was about 8 years before we lost Mason, and he was one of the first ones that reached out to me and really kind of helped me along those first few days for sure. And, you bring up a question I think Dan and I get often, and I know we've even kind of grappled with it a little bit about God. And when it first happens, at least I know for me, I'm Catholic and firm believer, and one of the first things I was thinking was, how could this have happened to our family? Like, we go to church, we pray, we follow the commandments, we do everything we're supposed to be doing. Why did you pick us? Did you struggle with that too? Was that something that was going through your mind those first couple hours or days? And how have you progressed, obviously, to where you're at now?
Oh, absolutely. I remember at one point someone came in that evening, and it's a friend, and he came over and grabbed me, and and was hugging me, and I was crying, and I remember at that moment I started apologizing to God. I said, I'm sorry, God, I'm sorry. I said, I don't know what I've done for this to happen, but I'm truly sorry. And the pastor was saying, this is not your fault. You did not cause this to happen. But I had that moment of, I'm sorry, God. It's my fault. And since that time, I'm with you. I have questioned many times, why, God? I haven't been angry with God, but I have been questioning many times, why me? Why us? Why, as you said, why did this happen to our family? Why did you have to take Caroline? Why did you have to let this happen? I think that's just a part of our natural human experience. But yes, I totally agree with you. That was something that's been in my mind many times.
I started reading When Bad Things Happen to Good People. I'm just on chapter 3 now. And one of the things that the author says in the first 2 chapters, he talks about exactly that and how Christians beat themselves up. And he gave the story of one lady who was told after she lost somebody that, oh, you're so strong. God picked you because you're strong enough to make good out of it. So yeah, this girl in the book, her response to being told, "You're so strong, God picked you because you can do something good with it," her response was, "Well, I wish I was weak." And it's like, yeah, I mean that go. I think we'd all agree that that goes in the bucket of don't say that to people. It's not helpful. There's two things that I want to back up with what you just said a few minutes ago, Kerry. First of all, it's totally appropriate. What's your foundation name, website, all of that info? We want people to know where they can look and help you out.
Yeah, that's the foundation is through my company. I'm a banker by trade. Um, it's called the Noble Bank Foundation, and you can find it that way. Noble Bank Foundation. There's we have an annual fundraiser for local charities, and also to fund the scholarships for Caroline Scholarship. So that's the best way to find it. Noble Bank Foundation.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then the other thing, you've made a couple statements throughout talking that when Caroline passed, that you and your wife decided within the first few hours that you wanted to be a help to others through your grief. And you followed that, or I think you may have said it before that. You said that you're not in a position yet to where you feel like you can help someone. And I don't know if you really processed what you were saying right after that, because you went through, after saying you're not in a position to help somebody, you funded 2 scholarships. You've helped your friend who, because when you grieve, it doesn't matter whose child passed away before the other. You help each other. So you've helped that friend. You're helping every husband and wife and mother and father who have lost somebody through sharing your story here. You're helping your colleagues. I mean, you rattled off person after person after person that you're helping in different ways. And man, it's awesome. I'm glad you're here. Your story encourages me because I'm grappling, wrestling with God, big time. I had the very first discussion, the first 2 people at my house, half an hour after we got home, was because one of them happened to work at the 911 center, and he walked into his shift like 30 minutes after our call. And when he saw it in the address, he knew. So he and another guy came over, and I had that exact discussion of, why am I such a evil person that God's punishing me? I think probably most Christians have that question. You're so encouraging to me hearing your story. So thank you for being here, man. Chris, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I want to double that what Dan said. It's not easy, folks, if you've never done a podcast before, or even these are really sensitive stories, and they're really personal, and it's not easy for Dan and myself to come on, or our guests like Kerry today coming on. So, Kerry, thank you for being able to come out here and tell your story, and really give hope to other people that are listening. That, hey, you're not alone. And Dan and I say that every week. If you're listening, you're not alone. We're all in this together. Reach out to myself. Reach out to Dan. Kerry, you're probably fine if people reach out to you on social media as well. You know, the only way we're going to get through this is together, by talking to each other, sharing stories. And to be honest, I love hearing the good stories. I love hearing about Caroline and the piano and the guitar and the people that they are, because that's what I want to remember about my son Mason. When I talk about him, I want to think about how awesome he was at soccer, and how all the kids just loved him, and how all his friends. And I don't want to think about the bad stuff. It's hard. I'm not that much behind you, Kerry. I lost Mason in May of 2020, so we're very close in time frame wise. And your story, it hits close to home as I think about my own story. So thank you for coming on and telling us everything with that.
Thank you for that encouragement of helping others. And as I said, again, I know God put this friend in my path a year before this happened, for this very reason. And I guess that's, at some point, I want to be that person for someone as well. I hope I never am. I hope I'm never called upon to be that person. I hope it never happens again. But if it does, I want to be that person. But I guess when I say I'm not ready, I think probably I'm talking from an emotional standpoint. If a friend, if this happened to a friend now, I would probably be as big of a basket case as they would be. And I'm just being real there. I want to be there for them as someone was there for me, but I'm not sure that I could do it at this particular moment, from that respect. But I am grateful that we've had the opportunities to help others as we have, and want to continue that for sure. And if it's okay, I want to tell another quick story about Caroline, and you just tell me when to stop. She was such a giving person as well, just kind-hearted and giving, and just cared for others. And I'm so proud of that. And I knew that, but I didn't realize to what extent it really was until she passed. While she was in college, I would get credit card bills each month, and I would call her and I was like, Caroline, what are you doing? Why is this bill? Because it was food. And she's like, well, I'm feeding people, Dad. I'm feeding my friends. I'm like, well, let their own families feed their friends, feed them. I mean, I'm feeding you. I'm not feeding the whole town. She's like, Dad, and she loved to cook. That's another thing. She was a great cook. She loved to cook. So she would have her friends over, her sorority sisters over, and she cooked. And I paid the bill. So many of her friends, and that was our joke at the time, I would say, well, who am I feeding tonight? That kind of thing. And I mean, story after story of her friends, her sorority sisters, others that came to me and just said, what a friend she was to them and what she meant to them, and how much they appreciated her willingness to give and her willingness to help. Many said that, when they were having an issue, she was the first phone call they would make because she was always there for them. And, she would bring them home from time to time. Of course, what did I do? I fed them. That's what I did. That's what we did. She passed on again on Monday the 17th. The funeral was that Friday because it was so late Monday night, and by the time the arrangements were made, it was that Friday. And the day before, the 2 days before, when we went to the funeral home to make the arrangements, this friend that I've told you about was the one who went with me to make these arrangements, and he did really more of the talking than I did because he was stable. I know the funeral director personally as well, so it was somewhat emotional from that respect as well. I do remember at one point in the conversation when the funeral director was talking, he was telling us about the service, and he was talking about the chapel at the funeral home. He said, now the chapel will comfortably seat 250 people. And I remember at that moment in my mind, I prayed. I said, God, please let 250 people come to her service. That was important to me. And I said, I just did. I said, oh, please, God, please let at least 250 people come. Over 1,000 people came to her visitation and memorial. They had to close the doors. It was so overrun, overwhelmed, and that it meant so much to me that she touched that many people. I know a lot of them were there for us, but I mean, so many, again, story after story that her friends would tell me of what she had done for them, how she had helped them, how she had fed them. And it just really warmed my heart to know that she was such a giver. and people appreciate it and recognize that fact.
That is a beautiful, beautiful legacy that she left. I mean, and that's a tribute to you and your wife as parents. I imagine her older brother as an older brother. What a beautiful, beautiful legacy. I think something that we've never talked about, I think is important for people to hear too, is how full that service was. I had the same feeling when I walked into the auditorium and saw the room full. It's a terrible moment, no doubt about it, but it helps seeing that the room is full. It helps just knowing that people care. Another thing that really affected me was the processional. I've always tried to pull over on the side of the road, but a lot of people don't. When I was in the processional for Jameson, seeing people pulling over, getting out of their car, putting their hand on their heart, that was touching. So little things that everybody can do to help people who are grieving. You don't need to know the person, but you can love on people who are hurting. I do have one more question, but I'll let Chris jump in. I want you to tell one more story, but I'll let Chris jump in.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, Kerry, one of the things we like to do on our podcast is to give advice to people that want to help others who are going through grief. They might not have been through any grief personally, but they want to help their friends or their loved ones who are going through grief at that moment. Is there any piece of advice that you would give to those that are listening that haven't been through grief? Maybe something that really helped you, some friends or family members, some things they did the first couple days that really, like you said, you're in a blur, you're in a daze. Like Patrick said on our last episode, you feel like you're in a movie that's in slow motion. Like, is there anything that you would give advice-wise that people can do to help their loved ones or friends that are dealing with grief if they want to help out?
Yeah, never be afraid to speak of that loved one. Never ignore the elephant in the room. Never ignore that it happened. Never ignore the conversation of that person. Feel free to acknowledge that that person existed to you. I know it's awkward for people. Before it ever happened to me, it was awkward for me. You see someone who's lost a loved one, especially a child, you don't know what to say. I understand that. I didn't know what to say. And it's an awkward situation, but if you truly care for someone, don't ignore that it happened because it's real. It happened. Don't be afraid to say to that person, hey, man, I'm praying for you. Or, hey, I love you. And you're in my thoughts and prayers. I'm sure you guys have experienced it as well. So many people people even will avoid you. I mean, I've had lots of people that I know very well who will see you in the store and you can see the eye cut where they avoid you. And it's because they don't know what to say, but that hurts as well when someone's avoiding you because they don't want to talk to you because it's awkward. So please acknowledge that you. All you have to say is, hey man, I'm thinking about you, or I'm praying for you. Just acknowledge their pain.
Yeah, no, I think Dan and I have definitely talked about this, and you're our third guest. And between Dan, myself, and all of our guests have all said the exact same thing, that we want to hear stories about our loved ones. We want to hear the good times. It's okay to bring up the good times. And so for those that are listening that haven't been through grief, you want to help your loved ones, bring up those good stories, those good memories, because it does distract from the pain for a couple minutes at least, for sure. Dan?
Well, the last thing I want to have you talk more about, until you say something else that sparks a new question. When Jameson passed, about a month after he passed, our school planted or installed a bench outside as a buddy bench at the recess field, and that was a great tribute. And at that ceremony, they presented us a framed weaving that Jameson's class had been working on in art. And apparently, one of his classmates, the first art class after he passed, she raised her hand and said, "Who's going to finish Jameson's weaving?" And they decided as a class that they were going to finish it. And they presented it framed where every one of his classmates signed one of the weaving strips and installed it, and all his teachers did, and they finished it. As Erica and I have proceeded through the just over 2 years of grief and gone through Jameson's stuff, we've found those things that were unfinished, and that for me is a very painful thing, seeing things unfinished. And we had bought Jameson the 5x5 Rubik's Cube for his last Christmas, and it sat on his dresser for 2 years unsolved. And I cried every time because it's a stupid little toy. But he loved Rubik's Cubes. It was one of the biggest things he had responded over. And I decided I have to finish it. And so I pulled it up on YouTube, and I was able to solve that thing. And it's sitting up on our memorial shelf for Jameson upstairs. Finished. You said, if I heard you correctly at the beginning, you said that she was working on a guitar, building her own guitar, was it? But it's unfinished right now?
She was building a guitar for my nephew, her cousin. She had, I didn't know how many guitars Caroline had until we cleaned out her apartment. I have probably 15 guitars that she had that she built or she worked on. But she was in the process of building a guitar for my nephew, who's now 20. He was, I guess, 18 at the time. He has one of her guitars she had loaned to him. And for the time being, I've told him just to keep that guitar, because the unfinished guitar is painful to see, because as you said, it's just something that will never be finished. It's just a reminder of unfinished business. And that's so hard to think about. That's tough.
Well, I totally get that. And like I said, it was 2 years before I could do the Rubik's Cube. I want you to do me a favor. I have a feeling this is the beginning of a pretty good friendship for all three of us, and Patrick as well. I want you to do us a favor, and if someday you or your nephew decide to finish it, when it's all done, we'd love to see it. And I totally understand if it's never finished because it's painful, but someday if that eats away at you and you guys find a way to get that done, please share that, because that to me is another beautiful, beautiful tribute to your, she sounds amazing. What a beautiful girl.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll certainly do that if and when that day comes. See, she was passionate as well, and she gave her all to something. When she decided to do something, she was going to do it. Again, like teaching herself to play guitar. And buying all these instruments. I had no idea. I'm sure I paid for most of those as well. I just didn't know it. The number of guitars, again, I think I have 15 guitars. I know she was always trading or buying and selling guitars, again, just a unique child. So I don't know how many has passed through her hands over the last few years, but just there's so many here, so much equipment, so much to remember. As I said, she was living in Birmingham, an hour away, so we had to clean out her apartment, and we spent, I guess, 2 days, and that was a really hard experience as well. She had a dog and a cat. She was a huge animal advocate. As a child, she was always dragging home a stray. I would come home and there would be 2 dogs here, and I would always say, "You have 2 days to find it a home. It's not staying." So she was constantly rehoming animals. She just had a heart for animals, and her dog and cat were her life. You know, that was her babies. She had a roommate as a young man. They were just friends, not romantic. They were good friends in school, and they were both living in Birmingham, and they ended up being roommates. Pretty much everything in the apartment was ours. The furnishings, with the exception of his bedroom, was his. You know, things that we had bought for her to furnish her apartment. But the only thing we took were her personal items and her bedroom furniture. The rest of the furniture I gave to her roommate because he needed it. We didn't. You know, he needed that. We didn't need it. And I wanted him to have that for use, but also as a remembrance of her. Another thing, I was trying to figure out what to do with the dog and the cat, because I knew Mom wasn't going to allow them to come here. So, you know, a lot of her friends, I started talking to her group of friends, you know, hey, is there some way we can get these animals rehomed? What are we going to do? And they had been together since they were a pup and kitten. So, I mean, they loved each other. And I just asked her roommate a couple of days after. It didn't even occur to me because I had even told him, I said, I'll get those animals out of your apartment. I promise I'll take care of them. You won't have to worry about it. I'll find a home for them. And it just occurred to me to ask him, I said, hey, do you want these animals? And he immediately said yes. And I said, no, don't answer that quickly. I said, why don't you take 24 hours and think about that, because that's a big responsibility. Almost to the minute, 24 hours, he called me and he said, I want the animals. He said, I want them to stay together because Caroline would want that. They had been together since they were little. And he said she would be happy knowing that the animals got to stay together. And so I said, well, they're yours. And since that time, sadly, the dog has passed. But I thought that he's such a great young man. He still texts me and we talk a lot. But it was just such a tribute. I thought that he, being a young man as he is, he wanted to do something to honor Caroline by keeping those animals together.
And that sounds great. I mean, sounds like a great man. And, you know, again, Kerry, I don't think you've given yourself enough credit of how good of a person you are and how you're helping others, and you don't even realize it. You know, the furniture is it is a big deal. I mean, it's hard because I know for me, anything Mason touched, I wanted. It's going with me. Like, so, you know, it's got to be hard to a degree to let that stuff go because there's memories on those as well. And, you know, it's a true testament to you and your wife of how good you are as people and how you're helping more than you really even realize it. And I wish you weren't in this situation, but you're helping a lot more than I think you realize it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I agree. So, Kerry, is there anything else you want to say or ask? Anything?
I just would ask, you know, for your continued prayers as well, and as I will be in prayer for you guys. This journey is not an easy one, and like I said, there's good days, there's bad days, there's happy days, there's guilty days. I do tend to feel guilty a lot of days. If I'm happy, I feel guilty for being happy. So, you know, I just ask for your continued prayers as well.
You got it, man. Chris, anything else from you, bud?
No, I want to thank everyone for listening again. And Kerry, thank you for coming on and telling your story. We know how difficult it is to relive those extremely difficult difficult moments, those worst moments of your life. But I hope you found it therapeutic in some sense. If you haven't talked about it, I know Dan and I, we talk about our stories often about Mason and Jameson, and I will encourage those as I do every episode. If you need help, don't be afraid to go get help. If you need to talk to someone, message myself, message Dan, message Kerry. Find someone you're comfortable with. Don't hold it in. This is a hard journey. This is not easy, like he said. It's the hardest thing I know I'm ever going to go through. This is 100% the hardest thing. And if it wasn't for my family, my friends, my loved ones, my new friends, Dan, Kerry, I know I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. So I want to throw that out there. If you need help, find someone to help. People are willing to help. You're not alone. Dan?
Yeah, as Kerry said earlier, everybody in this world needs a rock. Whether you're grief or whatever, we all have stories. And everybody needs a rock in their life to walk through their stories together and just help carry them. There's times that we need to be carried. There's times that we may do some carrying. You just never know. Kerry, thank you so much for joining us. I want our listeners to know that literally we met Kerry an hour and 15 minutes ago. Kerry wrote to Chris and I both earlier today just about he had begun listening to the podcast, and as he said earlier, he hasn't been ready to talk, but when he wrote that, I gave him the opportunity, hey, if you ever want to join us, we'd love to hear your story. And it takes a lot of courage to get on here, man. So thank you for reaching out today. Thank you for coming on to share your story. I guarantee you that there's at least one person out there I can guarantee you there's at least two people out there who you helped, because you're looking at both of them right now. But there is somebody else. Chris and I are getting at least one note every week now from somebody who started listening and just said thank you. I've gotten, now with Kerry's, I've gotten 3 this week. Kerry, thank you so much. You are welcome anytime. If you have more that you want to share about Caroline, you say the word, and we'll have you back on, because we would love to hear more about your amazing daughter. We'd love to hear more when you're ready about how you and your wife are doing, about the foundation work that you're doing, everything. You just reach out to us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that very much. And again, as I said at the beginning, I'm so appreciative of what you guys are doing to help others.
Yeah. Well, and you said it. We want to be a help to others through our grief. We're going through the exact same thing. So, for everybody who's listening, thank you for tuning in. I just Googled the Noble Bank Foundation, and it was the first link that popped up on Google. When you click on that link, as of right now, if you scroll down to the second one, it is Caroline's scholarship program. So we want everybody to go on there, check that out, and see how you can help support Kerry and his wife as they try to honor their girl. And as always, Miles for Mason, keep checking that out. Jameson's Joy, keep checking that out. For all of Kerry's friends who are listening for the first time, we welcome your feedback. We welcome your questions. We hope that you'll go back and listen to the whole season, because you'll learn some things. But we welcome your feedback and your questions so that hopefully we can help you. And you can contact any 3 of us through Facebook direct messages, through Jameson's Joy and Miles for Mason on Facebook, or info@jamesonsjoy.org. If you have any questions, comments, send them along, and I will get them to Chris or Kerry, whoever the appropriate person on. But thank you all for listening. Kerry, thank you so much.
Thank you.